I faked being smart for years. The payoff was wild. It started with the stapler. Carolyn borrowed it. Again. And then acted like I was an imbecile for even asking for it back. "Oh, Mark, were you actually using it? I assumed you just admired it from afar." Her voice dripped with that condescending honey she reserved specifically for me. This was Carolyn Klein, head of marketing initiatives, future VP, and reigning queen of the condescending comment. She also had a knack for borrowing my ideas, polishing them with buzzwords, and presenting them as her own. Mr. Henderson, our division manager, ate it up every time. Henderson, a man who thought Comic Sans was an acceptable font for internal memos, was easily impressed by anything that sounded vaguely intellectual. I was Mark, lower-level marketing associate. The guy who fetched coffee and made sure the printer didn't jam too often. I wasn't stupid, but I wasn't Carolyn. I was quiet, did my work, and mostly tried to avoid the spotlight. This made me invisible, and apparently prime target for Carolyn's passive-aggressive land grabs. The stapler incident was the last straw. I was tired of being invisible, tired of being the office doormat, tired of Carolyn taking credit for my work and treating me like I was mentally deficient. That night, I started researching. Not marketing strategies, not how to climb the corporate ladder. I researched intelligence, or rather, the perception of intelligence. Turns out, it's a lot more about performance than actual knowledge. I watched documentaries on astrophysics, even though I understood maybe 10 of what was being said. I plowed through articles on philosophy and economics, highlighting words that sounded impressive. I even subjected myself to TED Talks, meticulously noting the speaker's body language, vocal inflections, and how they used pauses for dramatic effect. My goal wasn't to become a genius. It was to mimic one. The first few attempts were disastrous. I tried dropping phrases like quantum entanglement and the Pareto principle into conversations at the water cooler. People just stared at me blankly. "You feeling all right, Mark?" someone asked, patting me on the back like I was about to have a seizure. Henderson looked particularly concerned. "Mark, are you? Maybe take a few hours off?" I realized I needed to be subtler, more strategic. Instead of throwing intellectual grenades, I started sprinkling my conversations with carefully chosen words and phrases. Leveraging synergies, thinking outside the box, paradigm shift. Standard corporate jargon, but delivered with a newfound air of confidence and authority. I also started paying attention to my posture. Shoulders back, chin up, making deliberate eye contact. I even invested in a pair of those ridiculously thick-framed glasses that instantly make you look smarter. I didn't need them. My vision was 20/20. But the effect was undeniable. It was slow going at first. But gradually, things started to change. People started listening to me, asking for my opinion. Even Carolyn seemed slightly less dismissive. Henderson was the easiest mark. I started contributing to meetings with vague but impressive-sounding pronouncements. "We need to embrace a more holistic approach," I'd say, nodding sagely. "We must optimize our core competencies." He'd beam at me. "Exactly, Mark." Exactly, I focused on Carolyn's projects, offering helpful suggestions that, in reality, were designed to subtly undermine her. I'd suggest a slightly different target demographic, a subtly flawed marketing campaign, a slightly more expensive ad buy. Just enough to throw things off without being overtly sabotage. For example, Carolyn was spearheading a new campaign for a line of organic dog food. I suggested she target high-income millennials with a focus on sustainability. Seemed reasonable, right? But I knew that particular demographic was fickle and easily distracted by the next trendy product. The campaign flopped. Sales were abysmal. Carolyn got a stern talking to from Henderson. I felt a twinge of guilt. But then I remembered the stapler, and the stolen ideas, and the constant condescension. The guilt faded quickly. David, a genuinely smart and hard-working guy in IT, saw right through me. He was too nice to call me out directly, but he'd drop hints. "You know, Mark," he said one day while fixing my computer, "it's easy to fake intelligence, but it's a lot harder to fake competence." I ignored him. I was too busy enjoying my newfound success. I was invited to important meetings. Henderson started seeking my advice on key decisions. I even got a small raise. Carolyn, meanwhile, was seething. She tried to expose me, accusing me of being a fraud, a charlatan, a walking, talking thesaurus. But her accusations just made her look petty and jealous. Henderson dismissed her concerns as sour grapes. "Carolyn, darling," he said with a patronizing smile, "I think you're just intimidated by Mark's intellectual prowess." That was a good day. My moment of truth came when corporate headquarters decided to send a team of senior executives to evaluate our division's performance. Henderson naturally wanted to impress them. He tapped me to present our new marketing strategy. This was it, my chance to shine, my chance to solidify my reputation as the office genius. But it was also my greatest risk. I had to convince a group of seasoned executives that I knew what I was talking about. I spent weeks preparing. I memorized statistics, charts, and graphs. I practiced my presentation in front of the mirror, perfecting my gestures and vocal inflections. I even bought a new suit, dark blue, with subtle pinstripes, the power suit of a fake intellectual. The day of the presentation arrived. The conference room was packed. The executives sat around the table, looking serious and imposing. Henderson introduced me with a flourish. And now, Mark will enlighten us with his visionary marketing strategy. I took a deep breath and launched into my presentation. I spoke with confidence and conviction, using all the tricks I'd learned. I quoted obscure marketing gurus, referenced cutting-edge technologies, and peppered my speech with buzzwords. The executives seemed impressed. They nodded their heads and scribbled notes. Carolyn, however, wasn't buying it. She sat there, arms crossed, a look of pure hatred on her face. I knew she was waiting for her chance to pounce. And then, she did. "Mark," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "that's a very creative presentation. But I have a few questions." She started firing questions at me, rapid fire, designed to expose my lack of genuine knowledge. "Can you elaborate on the ROI projections for this particular demographic? What's your rationale for using this specific algorithm? How does this strategy align with our overall corporate objectives?" I deflected as best as I could, but I could feel my facade starting to crack. I stumbled over my words, my voice wavering. I could see the executive's eyebrows rising. Henderson, bless his clueless heart, tried to intervene. "Carolyn, I think Mark has made his points quite clear." "No, Mr. Henderson," she interrupted. "I think it's important to clarify a few things. Isn't it, Mark?" She turned back to me, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Tell me, Mark, where did you get the inspiration for this strategy?" I hesitated. I couldn't admit that I'd lifted it from a series of blog posts and a half-remembered Harvard Business Review article. I developed it myself," I stammered. "Really?" Carolyn raised an eyebrow. "Because it sounds awfully familiar to a presentation I saw given by Forrester Research last year. Word for word, in some sections." My stomach dropped. She'd called my bluff. "That's absurd," I said weakly. "Is it?" Carolyn turned to David, who was sitting at the back of the room, looking deeply uncomfortable. "David, you were in that Forrester presentation, weren't you? Does Mark's strategy sound familiar to you?" All eyes turned to David. He hesitated, clearly torn. He knew the truth. He knew I was a fraud. But he was also a decent guy. He didn't want to be responsible for destroying my career. David stuttered. "Well, the presentations are certainly aligned in some key points, yes. It's hard to draw a direct comparison." Sarah, the HR manager, spoke up. "David, with all due respect, I am finding this line of questioning unprofessional. But I trust your judgment. Please be frank. What do you really think?" David took a deep breath. I think Mark's presentation is impressive, but I have some concerns about its originality. I believe he may have embellished some of his contributions." The air went out of the room. The executives exchanged knowing glances. Henderson looked like he'd been slapped. Carolyn smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile. Sarah turned to Mark. "Mark, can you perhaps give us some insight into who you studied or read in order to be prepared for this presentation?" I knew I was done. I read a lot, I started lamely. I'm just naturally gifted at picking up on different concepts. Sarah, with laser-like precision, pressed. So all these techniques, strategies, and frameworks are your original ideas? You didn't try to emulate anyone in particular? I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. I was caught. Did you, for example, study how Mr. Henderson talks? Sarah added, gesturing at the manager. My face turned red as I looked down at the table. And what about Mr. Matthews in accounting? Sarah asked, pressing her advantage. I notice you use some of his turns of phrase, too. The room was silent. Sarah continued. And what about Carolyn? Weren't you using some of her material and mannerisms, too? The truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. I'd been so focused on fooling everyone else that I'd forgotten to consider the consequences. I'd gotten caught up in the game, blinded by my own ambition and resentment. I had let the power go to my head. I mumbled. I tried to learn from everyone. The executives conferred in hushed tones. Henderson just stared at me, his face a mask of disappointment and betrayal. Finally, one of the executives spoke. Mr. Henderson, I think we've seen enough. We'll postpone the project indefinitely. We'll revisit it when we have a clearer understanding of the strategic direction. The executives filed out of the room, leaving Henderson, Carolyn, David, Sarah, and me in a stunned silence. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Henderson was publicly humiliated. He was transferred to a smaller division, effectively ending his career aspirations. Carolyn, despite being vindicated, wasn't spared either. She was reprimanded for her unprofessional behavior and her history of creating a toxic work environment. As for me, I wasn't fired, but I was demoted, stripped of my responsibilities and relegated to a small, windowless office in the basement. It seemed that the stapler had finally exacted its revenge, but the real punishment was the looks I got in the office now. I was no longer respected, but pitied or ridiculed. The office turned on me like a pack. I spent weeks cleaning out my desk, dreading every day, and hating myself for what I had done. Looking back, I realized I hadn't achieved anything. I hadn't become smarter. I hadn't improved the company. I just made a fool of myself and everyone around me. One day, after another week of being the butt of the joke, I was called up to Sarah's office. Mark, I know what you did was wrong, but I am starting to see the forest for the trees, Sarah started. It seems that your charade was actually a symptom of poor management style by Mr. Henderson and a toxic work environment fostered by Carolyn. She continued. As such, I am willing to drop the demotion if you are willing to keep your current position. And to that end, I am willing to hire you on as a management consultant to help with those issues. I had to restrain myself from jumping up and down. Sarah continued. If you are unwilling, that is fine too. We will maintain the demotion, and you can work out the rest of your time with the company in the basement. It's your call. I thought for a second and said, I think I would be a good fit. It's time for a change, and I am the right person to do it. Sarah smiled. Okay. It's settled. But keep the glasses in the basement. We will be looking for tangible results.